Margaret stood at her kitchen window watching the morning light filter through the lace curtains she had sewn 20 years ago, when life was different, when hope felt as certain as sunrise. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier on cream-colored paper with gold lettering announcing the wedding of her former husband Robert to his new bride Catherine. What made her hands tremble as she held that elegant card was not the fact of his remarriage, but the handwritten note at the bottom. In Robert's familiar script asking her to attend with their triplets, Emma, Sarah, and Michael. She had stared at those words for a long time, trying to understand his intentions. After their divorce 5 years ago, Robert had become a different man, or perhaps he had always been this way and she had simply chosen not to see it. He had built a successful consulting business, married a woman 15 years younger, and seemed determined to showcase his new life at every opportunity. Margaret had struggled financially after their separation, working 2 jobs to keep their small apartment and provide for their 3 children who were now 8 years old. She cleaned offices at night and worked as a school secretary during the day, sleeping only a few hours between shifts but never complaining because she understood that sometimes life asks more of us than we think we can give. The children had asked about their father's wedding with the innocent curiosity that comes naturally to young hearts. Emma, the most sensitive of the 3, had worried aloud whether attending would make Margaret sad Sarah ever practical, had announced she would wear her best dress and behave perfectly. Michael had simply asked if there would be cake. Margaret had called her sister Helen that evening, needing someone who would understand the complicated emotions swirling in her heart. Helen had listened without judgment as Margaret wondered whether Robert's invitation was genuine kindness or something else entirely. "You know him better than anyone," Helen had said gently. "Trust your instincts about his motivations, but remember that whatever his reasons, your children deserve to be there for their father's important day." Margaret had agreed to attend not for Robert, but for Emma, Sarah, and Michael, who loved their father despite his flaws, and deserved to witness this milestone in his life. The morning of the wedding brought unexpected challenges. Margaret's modest blue dress, the one she wore to parent conferences and school events, had a stain that wouldn't come out despite her careful attempts with stain remover. Her car made concerning noises when she started it, and she worried it might not make the 30-minute drive to the elegant venue Robert had chosen. As she stood in her bedroom feeling overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control, the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she found Helen standing there with a garment bag and a mysterious smile. "I thought you might need some sisterly support today," Helen said. Stepping inside from the garment bag, she produced a stunning emerald green dress with 3/4 sleeves and a flattering fit that would complement Margaret's auburn hair. "Helen, this is too much," Margaret protested. "I can't accept something so expensive." "It's not expensive," Helen replied with a gentle laugh. "I've been saving for months knowing this day would come and wanting you to feel beautiful and confident." She had also arranged for a car service, explaining that her friend's son had started a small transportation business and needed the work. Margaret felt tears of gratitude welling in her eyes as she realized that kindness often appears in unexpected forms. An hour later, Margaret and the triplets rode in, comfortable silence, toward the wedding venue. The children looked wonderful in their carefully chosen outfits, Emma in a soft yellow dress, Sarah in navy blue with white trim, and Michael in his first real suit. They chattered excitedly about seeing their father and meeting Catherine, whom they had heard about but never met. Margaret listened to their innocent enthusiasm while battling her own nervousness about facing Robert's family and friends, many of whom had taken sides during the divorce. The venue was even more impressive than she had imagined, with manicured gardens and a stone facade that spoke of old money and refined taste. As their car pulled up to the entrance, Margaret noticed the surprised expressions on the faces of arriving guests. She realized they had expected her to arrive in her old car looking defeated and struggling. Instead, she emerged from the hired car in her elegant dress with her beautiful children at her side, embodying dignity and grace. Robert stood near the entrance greeting guests, and Margaret watched his expression change from confidence to something resembling shock. Catherine stood beside him in a magnificent white gown, looking every bit the successful young professional she was. Margaret approached them with her children, feeling more composed than she had expected. "Hello, Robert," she said simply. Thank you for inviting us to share this special day. Robert seemed momentarily speechless, perhaps realizing that his former wife possessed a strength and elegance he had forgotten or chosen to ignore. Catherine stepped forward with genuine warmth, extending her hand to Margaret. "I'm so glad to finally meet you," Catherine said. "Robert has told me so much about you, and I've been looking forward to meeting Emma, Sarah, and Michael." Margaret found herself genuinely liking Catherine, who seemed kind and sincere in her desire to build a positive relationship. The ceremony was beautiful, held in the venue's garden, with white flowers and soft music, creating an atmosphere of romance and hope. Margaret sat with the children in the third row, close enough to show support, but far enough to avoid any awkwardness. Emma held her hand during the vows while Sarah and Michael fidgeted quietly in the way. Children do during solemn occasions. Margaret found herself moved by the genuine love she witnessed between Robert and Catherine. Whatever complicated emotions she harbored about her former husband, she could see that he and Catherine truly cared for each other. During the reception, Margaret was surprised by the number of people who approached her with kindness. Some were old friends from her married life who had maintained their affection for her, despite the divorce. Others were new acquaintances, who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her Mrs. Henderson. Robert's elderly aunt, whom Margaret had always loved, made a point of sitting with her during dinner. "You know, dear," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, "I never understood what happened between you and Robert, but I want you to know that you were always a daughter to me, and that hasn't changed." Margaret felt overwhelmed by the unexpected warmth she encountered. She had prepared herself for judgment or pity, but instead found acceptance and genuine care. The children had a wonderful time, dancing with their father and getting to know Catherine, who proved to be patient and engaging with them. Margaret watched from her table, feeling a complex mix of sadness and joy. Sadness for the family they had once been, and joy seeing her children, happy and secure in the knowledge that both their parents loved them. As the evening progressed, Robert approached her table during a quiet moment. "Margaret," he began awkwardly, "I want to thank you for being here and for bringing the children." She looked at him carefully, trying to read his intentions. "They belong here, Robert," she replied simply. "This is an important day in your life, and they needed to be part of it." He sat down beside her, looking uncomfortable but determined to continue. "Also want to apologize," he said. "I know the divorce was hard on everyone, and I haven't always handled things well since then." Margaret considered his words carefully. She had learned during their 5 years apart that forgiveness was not about forgetting or excusing hurtful behavior, but about freeing herself from the burden of resentment. "We both made mistakes, Robert," she said finally. "What matters now is that we do better for the children." He nodded, looking relieved and perhaps surprised by her. "Grace, Catherine really wants to have a good relationship with you," he continued. "She thinks it's important for the children to see all their parents getting along." Margaret smiled, thinking about the young woman who had welcomed her so warmly. "Like her Robert," she said honestly. "She seems to genuinely care about Emma, Sarah, and Michael, and that means everything to me." As the evening wound down, Margaret found herself reflecting on the unexpected turns life can take. She had arrived at this wedding prepared for difficulty and instead found healing. She had expected judgment and instead encountered kindness. She had feared feeling diminished and instead felt valued and respected. Catherine approached their table carrying a piece of wedding cake for each of the children. "I wanted to thank you personally," Catherine said to Margaret, "for raising such wonderful children and for being so welcoming to me today." Margaret was touched by the younger woman's sincerity. "They're lucky to have you in their lives," Margaret replied, "and I can see how much happiness you bring to Robert." As they prepared to leave, the children hugged their father and thanked Catherine for including them in such a special day. The hired car arrived, and Margaret gathered her small family for the journey home. As they rode through the evening darkness, Emma fell asleep against her shoulder, while Sarah and Michael chattered quietly about the day's events. Margaret looked out the window at the passing lights, thinking about the lessons she had learned. She had discovered that dignity comes not from perfect circumstances, but from how we choose to handle imperfect ones. She had learned that kindness often appears when we least expect it, and from sources we hadn't anticipated. Most importantly, she had realized that moving forward in life doesn't require forgetting the past, but rather,